Wow, that musical accompaniment means it is time for communication in a crisis. And I'm really, really grateful for you joining me today. My name is Dan Hare, and I'm the Communications Director at eShop. And I didn't realise the tune was going to go on quite that long. There we go. My mission over the next half an hour is to hopefully give you some ideas and some insights as to how to continue to be an effective marketer and to communicate during this very challenging time. Now, what I said in the stuff for this webinar is I was going to look at 5 strategies for keeping and improving customer engagement, and indeed 5 ideas to generate demand before things return to normal. And having looked at this in detail in terms of what I'm going to recommend to you today, there's a lot of overlap between the two. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is effectively when we're looking at things like customer retention at the moment, we should also be looking at lead generation. And as much as they are usually 2 distinct disciplines, my firm belief at the moment is whether you're talking to customers and trying to retain their business, or indeed you are speaking to potential customers and trying to win their business, the likelihood is their agendas are going to be similar, and what they need from you is also likely to be similar. And that will probably come down to 3 specific things: digital, practical, and financial disruption within their own businesses. It's fairly likely right now, whether they are existing customers of yours or people that you would love to be your customers, they are experiencing pain within their businesses along these 3 categories. And a friend of mine introduced me to a model a couple of weeks ago called the Kubler-Ross change curve. And it's actually something which was originally designed around the idea of coping with grief, coping with loss. But it has a lot of business application as well, as we move through different phases of how we feel towards a new reality, how we deal with disruption in our lives, within our businesses, and indeed within the wider world right now. And I'm a big fan of audience participation, so I was just wondering how you're all feeling professionally at the moment in relation to that curve. Where do you see yourselves on the curve in terms of your current work? And what I'll do, again, perils of the technology working as planned, we've got a little poll for you, so you should be able to answer that question now using the webinar software. Is the results of what you just told me. And indeed, experimentation seems to be where most of you are presently. However, we do have a few people still stuck in frustration and indeed early stages in that. And I think that is completely understandable. And obviously, I don't know the specifics of what each of you are experiencing within your businesses and within your lives right now. But I think it's fair to say for some time we're going to find people at different stages of this curve. What I would say is, for those of you who are on the webinar today, don't beat yourselves up. I think, although I personally view myself as being at the decision phase right now, I'm happy to concede when the kids went back to school on Monday and everything seemed to go absolutely chaotic, I had a little kind of step back to the depression stage, but I'm absolutely determined to push that forward into integration in the days ahead, because I think it's so important from the perspective of customer retention and lead generation again, that we are seen to be ahead of the curve, and I don't mean in terms of the COVID-19 curve, but ahead of the curve in terms of what we're doing within our businesses, and indeed what our businesses are doing to contend with this new reality, with these difficulties and frustrations. And I wonder if there's a difference between what you would answer for yourself from what you would answer for your business. So let's just have a look at that from the perspective of your organization. Same question again, what stage do you think your organization is at currently? As a collective, are you making decisions? Are you moving things forward? Or is there still challenges within the business itself? Interesting. So with that one, I'll end that there, guys. I'm conscious of everyone's time. Results, we've got businesses generally making decisions or at the experimentation phase, which I think is very heartening. I think I wonder whether just a week ago you would have answered that question differently. And I think this is one of the interesting things about the situation at the moment. is things are moving so fast. What's being said and what the advice is, and indeed what's happening, is changing so very, very rapidly. Now, what that means from the perspective of your business, and as I say, from the perspective of retaining customers and winning new ones, is my strong belief is you need to be an enabler of change. Don't be a victim of it. And as I said, there's 5 core things for you to take from today's webinar, and this is one of them. You have to work out ways in which your organization is actually going to help your customers, and indeed your prospective customers, to change and to cope with the disruption that's happening within their businesses. And we see fantastic examples of that all over the place right now. You know, before Easter, my kids were an absolute nightmare with their homework, and this week, fantastically, my son just yesterday, he was on a remote session with about 150 other pupils, doing his music lessons, singing away, which was fantastic. And you know, in terms of being an enabler for change, one of my colleagues pointed out to me at that point that the kit is now available to turn your car into an office. If obviously you can't go to the office, and the home environment is obviously you know, being prioritised for the kids. So you know, talking about literal enablers of change, you know, you can even now turn your car into a home office. A little bit more of a sensible example, Girl Guides. You know, digital disruption is not a new thing, and yet I've seen an awful lot of examples in just the last few weeks of where organisations who may have traditionally been resistant to digital disruption have had to embrace it fully. There's just been no alternative. And I would encourage you, we'll send out a post-webinar email with some links, some helpful content for you to follow up on. But go and have a look at what the Girl Guiding organisation have put together in terms of the very, very detailed, very practical information for their members, for the people who run the Girl Guiding, the Brownie associations. You know, very, very helpful information to ensure that they can make their own journey along that curve. So as an organization, they are effectively leading their customers, you know, their stakeholders, their members, by demonstrating what's required to contend with the disruption and move forward with that change. Now, you know, digital disruption is one thing, practical disruption is equally painful, but the other thing is just no point in denying it right now. There's going to be financial disruption as well. And if you have been lucky enough to avoid any difficult conversations with customers thus far, then lucky you. But there's no two ways about it. You know, the financial aspect of things is being impacted significantly as well. So again, you have to find ways to lead that change. How are you going to adapt your proposition? And I don't necessarily mean just, you know, not billing people, you know, for what they need from you, but you do need to find ways, financial models that will help your customers to cope with the current situation, and most importantly, in coping with it, keep that customer and keep them contributing to your business and to your bottom line. And I want to tell you a little story about a bit of my background, just to really drive that home. I used to work for a design agency from 2000 through to 2012, and we worked in a fantastic office called the Chapel. This is a picture of it. You know, our main meeting room was actually on the altar of the old chapel, and never ceased to impress clients. We did crazy stuff. We took the whole company on annual ski trips. It was fantastic. Our clients loved us, the staff loved us, and we made a lot of decent money. However, in 2008, the wheels came off very, very quickly. And in just one financial year, the actual period in which I think the majority of this pain happened was probably only 4 to 5 months. All of our customers who had been paying us to do fantastic marketing campaigns and to do some really clever stuff, well, not all of them, but a lot of them stopped, or they very significantly reduced what they were paying us. And when I remember back to that time, one thing I know is, you know, marketing agencies are traditionally the worst people at marketing themselves. They're so focused on doing good work for their other customers. We were already not very good at our own marketing, and we became even worse. We effectively didn't market ourselves. We didn't communicate. We didn't communicate with prospective customers, and we sure as heck didn't communicate with current customers as well, because there was a fear that if we speak to someone, they're just going to want to stop paying us. And lo and behold, that's what happened anyway. So I do think communication is absolutely vital right now. You do need to be talking to people, because if you hide away, if you're only focused internally on chopping out costs from the business, chopping people out of the business, yes, that might save you money, but it's equally not going to leave you with much business in the long term. So in helping other organizations to change, to move forward, you're actually doing things to protect your own business. And that is one of the key points which I'd like you to take from today, is you need to segment based on current behavior. Segmentation, I'm hoping I'm preaching to the converters as far as marketing is concerned, is an incredibly important discipline anyway. But all your segmentation from even just a few weeks ago, you need to kind of rip up that rule book and start again right now. You need to be looking at current behavior. What's happening now, today? Not last week, certainly not last month or last quarter, now, today. And what I want to do is share with you some ideas and some tips as to how to do that. Firstly, as we talked about, there's going to be people who want a financial conversation, or perhaps they don't want a financial conversation with you, and they're going to be looking on your website, and they look at the pricing pages of your website, and that's something you need to be looking out for. If you come to the eShop pricing page, if you're a customer, we're going to be a little bit nervous and we're going to try and speak to you. And obviously, if you're a prospect, we're going to try and speak to you probably, a little bit more hopeful. But the idea here is, from a behavioral tracking perspective, you need to be looking at what your customers are doing. And obviously, the elephant in the room is the current financial challenges that so many businesses face. It would be daft to not do anything about that and just wait for the worst. So, for those of you who use eShop, use things like the page triggers to track those important interactions. And as I said, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So from a customer retention perspective, if you see people looking at pricing information, then obviously you need to act on that. And likewise, if you see people looking at it and they are prospective customers, again, that's something you need to act on. And, in no small part, if potential leads have looked for that information and looked for some support and help from their current suppliers and they haven't been able to find it, that might be what's driving them to you in this current situation. Now, when we look at larger brands, and certainly when we look at consumer marketing, then obviously that segmentation tends to be a lot more sophisticated and complex, and you tend to rely more on demographic samples. It's a little bit too much to cover in today, but the lovely thing about having been through a recession, the lovely thing, just in 2008, in the internet age, is there's an awful lot of research and a lot of documentation on what happened and how businesses coped, and which businesses did well and which businesses didn't do well out of the financial crisis of 2008. And I think it's well worth revisiting some of that, especially if you're working for large consumer brands. Harvard Business Review has some really great stuff on segmenting customers and looking at how they act differently depending on whether the product or service that you're offering is essential or disposable. And that's something which, again, we'll share in the links after. It's well worth looking in more detail at. In more practical terms, in terms of what you can do today, if you don't know what your customers currently need from you, if you don't know how to segment them, ask. It's the easiest thing to do in the world from an email marketing perspective is to do single question surveys. A couple of links, a couple of images, and one question, and just monitor how many people click A and how many click B. Okay, you don't need any complicated software to do that. You don't need any survey software. It's a great way of understanding how customers are feeling en masse, and indeed modeling that. Okay, well, if customers are feeling that way, perhaps potential customers are feeling the same way. If we've got businesses who we'd like to work with who are very similar to businesses who we already work with, then chances are we can take the same insight from that and use it. But the key thing there is segment it. You don't want to turn around to your whole client base and say, hey, we're dropping our prices. It needs to be something which is segmented and offered only to those who are putting you in a position where you don't really have much choice. Likewise, when we look at segmenting customers, we also look at engagement in the more general sense. So within eShop, again, if you're a current customer, then you have the ability to see when contacts that you're communicating with are slipping away. What we mean by that is people who haven't registered any activity, no opens, no clicks, no website interactions within the last 30 days. So when I say about looking at customer behavior and looking at what's happening now, I mean, look at that today. You know, even if it's something you look at regularly, is there people that have gone away in the last 30 days? You know, very regrettably, I've had a couple of examples in recent days where I've been told that customers who I have, you know, very good and long-term relationships with are no longer with their businesses, and I need to deal with somebody new. And I don't like that, but it's the reality that I just have to face. So again, in terms of using segmentation, you know, you need to be looking at things like re-engagement campaigns, right? If people seem to be slipping away, where have they gone? Are they still there? You know, can we still reach them? And if we can't, what actions do we need to take to find somebody new? Now, a couple of you sent in some questions that you wanted to ask for the webinar. I'm really grateful for you for doing that. And I wanted to make sure I gave you hopefully some good answers. So we had a couple of questions in terms of when is the best time to send out an email during the lockdown? And do you think it's a bad idea to send too many emails, texts during the lockdown? Well, I'll start with the second one. It's not a bad idea to send out lots of emails and texts at the moment, because I think there is a hunger for information. But it's back to this segmentation point, is are you sending the right information to the right people at the right time? If you're sending blanket communication to everybody and it's not irrelevant, you could end up with difficulty. When I look at the first question, my advice to you just a few weeks ago would have been 73% of business-to-business decision makers research products during the evenings and 51% during the weekends. With consumer, it's a lot more varied depending on the brand, the circumstances, and the market segments that you're after. The reality is today, I just don't know what's happening there. My guess is people their working habits are different from what they would have been just a few weeks ago. So I can't give you an authoritative answer on it, but what I would suggest is you go and test it, okay? So use tools like split testing to be able to judge whether there are better times of the day or better days of the week to email people. And yes, there'll be lots of research online about that from days gone by, weeks gone by, months gone by. But it's probably changed right now. So the best thing to do is, if you're not sure today about when's the best time to send an email, send one at 9, send one at 12, send one at 5 p.m. and monitor those results and adjust your behavior accordingly. If you have already sent campaigns and you want to do that analysis, just bear in mind that when an email is sent, it doesn't necessarily relate exactly to when it was then read. So look at things like interaction timeframes. And what you tend to see with most business-to-business emails, certainly, is that you get a bounce the morning after a campaign has been sent. I don't mean a bounce as in the address is not deliverable. I mean as in, you know, people who missed the email yesterday will look at it early the following day. So, you know, don't necessarily worry too much about you know, when you send, you know, relating to be when people interact with it per se. In the more general sense, we have seen an increase in the engagement rate for most campaigns of recent, which would suggest, obviously, with everyone being caught at home, they are looking at email more. Indeed, they may be chained to their inbox all day, every day. Now, the third tip is to work out what customers are going to need, okay? It might not be what you usually sell. So again, this is back to that idea of being an enabler of change. You need to be looking ahead, okay? As I say, what happened last week is ancient history. It's what's happening in the weeks ahead that we need to plan for. As you know, good content marketing takes time to create. You know, creating web pages, designing emails, creating the assets to be able to influence your customers and your potential prospects is not something that you can do just like that, which means you need to be out ahead of the game in terms of working out what it is you should be talking to your customers and prospects about. And I thought this was quite a funny one. If you thought that the toilet paper saga was crazy, wait until 25 million women tried to book a hair appointment. My wife did offer me a grade 1 all over, which I have politely declined thus far. But yes, I think we can probably understand how an industry like hairdressing, which at the moment can't even open, can't operate, once there is some return, or not necessarily to normality, but when they are able to offer a service again, there's going to be huge demand. Now, if you are a hairdresser, how are you going to answer that demand? One of our customers, Tony and Guy, their Australian operation, I've seen emails going out from them already. advising clients about what they're doing to their salon environments to ensure people's safety and to ensure that it's somewhere which people are going to want to go. And I think in a consumer capacity, when we are all able to go out again, that is again, a very important thing in terms of what are people going to need from you. How are you going to need to adapt the business that you perhaps had to close a few weeks ago to cope with huge levels of demand and indeed restrictions and what have you. So think ahead, think what you need. If you're the salon, think about how you're going to cope with a huge glut of bookings. If you're the software provider to those salons, how are you going to help them ensure that they can cope with that demand? And indeed, how are you going to be ahead of the game in terms of helping them, advising them on that change? You see in other consumer industries already an effort to try and move things forward past the current kind of impasse. Groupon offering to help save local businesses by offering vouchers rather than the actual experiences that they normally do, so that they can be redeemed at a later date. The cruise industry, if I had to list the things that I absolutely wouldn't do right now, go on a cruise ship is probably fairly high on the list. But what about next year? What about the year after? I think it's pretty safe to say after we get some return to normality, we're all going to need a haircut and we're all going to need a holiday. So how can you start to plan for a return? How can you even generate money today by offering vouchers, by offering discounts, by offering early access? How do your best clients ensure that they are the first people who can consume your product or service at the point where you're able to re-establish delivery of that? I looked specifically at the recruitment industry a couple of days ago, following some discussions with a couple of our current clients in that sector. And again, pretty safe to say their business model has been fundamentally disrupted as, a lot of the roles that were on offer have just disappeared. And indeed, a very rapid swing of the pendulum from, there being lots of roles and not a lot of candidates to it being the complete reverse of that. And I've seen lots of recruitment advertising trapped in the denial stage. I've seen several emails from recruitment agents which basically said, we're still open for business, we've got lots of candidates, are you hiring? Please, are you hiring? And in comparison to that, I see some thinking ahead, thinking about being an enabler of the change again and thinking about what their customers are going to need, offering things like insights as to how they will conduct remote interviews. And the lovely thing about that is, back to our pricing page example, if you can track those behaviors, it will give you a good insight to be able to segment again the customers and indeed the prospects who are at least looking like they are going to continue hiring. It's safe to say there will be a lot of companies that don't do any hiring for some time, but if you can put out content marketing, thought leadership pieces, show yourself to be ahead of the curve, and in doing so, use the insight from who interacts with that content to give you an idea as to who you can target, then I think that's probably a much more sensible place to be than just pleading that people keep going with a business model that perhaps isn't going to return to normality for some time. The other thing is, deliver value in any way you can. Be practical. Like I said, the Girl Guides, fantastic insight, help content. Be generous, make sure your customers feel like they're getting value from you in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways, over and above what you might offer them normally. This is a time for us to help as much as possible wherever we can, and indeed to hopefully experience some help from others at the same time. What I would say is, be aware of being seen to exploit the situation. And I've seen an awful lot of marketing examples in recent weeks, which for me are dangerously close to the mark of looking like they're exploitative. I've been using some software called TeamViewer to do some remote sessions, and every time I finish one of those remote sessions, they tell me that they are here for me and that we are all in this together and that I can buy their software now. Very hand to mouth. And again, one of the questions that we had for the session, what can I do as a fairly new marketer to help my communication stand out more, especially during this time? Again, it's back to that principle of segmentation. Avoid being vanilla. Be relevant to people right now. Now, I ditched it from the deck to save time, but also we had some technical difficulties. I'll share the link in the follow-up stuff. There's a YouTube video that's put something together of all the current advertising that's running at the moment, and it all looks the same, soft music, same sort of statements and things like that. And it's one of the dangers at the moment is, everyone seems to be doing similar things. You've got to achieve standout. You've got to, like I say, be looking ahead of that curve and saying, I'm at the end of this curve. I have got things under control, and I'd like you to come along with me, and I can help. Okay. On the relevancy piece, again, think about things like geography, think about industry, etc., etc. HubSpot, an organization who I would conventionally associate with really good targeting, really good segmentation. They send me emails about what I need to know about the US stimulus package. And from the subject line alone, I can tell you, I don't really need to know anything about the US stimulus package right now. So again, be careful of what you're sending and who you're sending it to. Make sure it's relevant. Make sure it's not exploitative. And if you are going to bring empathy into your marketing and your content, please be careful. Please don't be seen to be falsely demonstrating false empathy. For time reasons, I'll skip over a couple of examples. Now, in terms of that principle of giving, one of the guys which I've followed for a long time, Gary Vaynerchuk, he is a digital marketing guru, a fantastic speaker, and he offers his help, his advice, his insight on a regular basis via LinkedIn sessions. He has no agenda. He lets people bring the agenda to him. So, it's an open mic session where people literally come with their questions, with their issues, and he will answer them as best he can. Again, delivering value in any way he can without it being necessarily linked to a transaction, to a product, to a service. I think this is one of the interesting aspects of brand marketing right now is, can you perceive your brand to be the forefront of what needs to happen to adapt to the changes which are necessary, and can you be seen as being helpful, being proactive as a consequence? Because let's face it, we all talked about this earlier on. The good news is for most of you, your businesses are at that experiment and decision phase, but I'm sure you can think of a client or two who's perhaps a little bit behind that. You need to offer them that help in any way you can, not just to retain their business today, but to retain it in the longer term. And indeed, if you can continue doing a good job for the customers that you're doing right now, if some of your competitors are a little bit more focused internally, then it might be a great opportunity to win business away from them at the same time. The next thing is get internal buy-in, okay? Demonstrate your ROI as a marketing function daily, okay? What has the marketing function, what has the communication function delivered to the business this week, okay? One of the tragic things about most recessions is that marketing tends to be the first thing that gets cut. And again, that's something I experienced in a very raw form in 2008. Okay, we're going to stop all marketing because there's no point. No one's going to buy. And that's daft. It's not a case of no one's going to buy. Yes, some people will stop, but there are others who will actually need to spend more. And there will be some who realize the opportunity that is in front of them, whereby there are customers or potential customers that they wouldn't have been able to engage with previously. There are potential customers whereby they would have never had a look in, even a few weeks ago. But because the goalposts have changed so significantly, so quickly, people are going to be more open to your proposition right now than perhaps they would be before, if your proposition is good enough for them. So as sales start to drop, businesses typically cut costs, but what I'd say is, well, this is actually from Harvard Business Review again, some insights from the previous recession. It's indiscriminate cost cutting, and certainly in marketing, is a mistake. You do need to continue marketing. You do need to continue communicating with your customers. Work out ways in which that customer communication can have just as much value in terms of lead generation and potential new business as well, and keep on doing good work. And when you've done that good work, make sure you're able to show your business the value that you're creating. Find ways to save the company money. Find ways to add value, even if it's beyond the scope of your current job description. If you're in customer retention and and customer success right now, how can you contribute to sales and marketing? If you're in sales and marketing, how can you contribute to customer retention and support and things like that? This is a time for departments to come together and look at the customer need collectively. Making changes to your marketing, making changes to your content, to your blog is a relatively straightforward thing. If you need to actually make changes to your products and services, obviously that's going to require buy-in from other stakeholders within your organization. And in terms of justifying your existence, make sure you've got data. When we come back to that segmentation thing, well, okay, let's be telling the business how many of our customers are on the pricing page. Let's be telling the business about how many prospects are on the pricing page, how many prospects have registered for the webinar about remote interview techniques, for example. So, it's important that the rest of the business is taken on this journey as well and knows that things are still happening, and indeed there is business still to be won. So in summary, you need to be an enabler of change. Okay, you need to segment based on current behavior today and review it again next week and the week after. Keep a close eye on what people are doing right now. Keep an eye on what your customers are doing, and indeed model that and apply the same to your leads and your potential customers. Deliver value in any way you can. Even if it's got nothing to do with your product or service, is it something that your customers need? Can you provide insight in relation to it? Number 4, work out what your customers are going to need. Try and demonstrate that you are ahead of the curve. Have content marketing, have webinars, have things that will, sorry, that's somebody else's phone going off, have things which you will be able to show to your customers and your prospects to help them on their own journey along that curve to a new reality and to having adapted to that change. And lastly, as I said, get internal buy-in. Don't think you can do this all on your own as a marketer. You need engagement from senior management. You need engagement from other teams, and especially when it comes to things like understanding the issues of the customer at the moment. Chances are your finance team, your customer retention teams, your sales teams are already having conversations, perhaps difficult conversations with customers, where you can learn from that and you can deliver marketing, communications, content, webinars, white papers, etc., which really are useful, genuinely useful to people in terms of adapting to the disruption that they're currently facing in their businesses. So in summary, stay calm. I think there are signs already that as you've seen with your own responses to this, we are starting to adapt to some of these things. Please protect customer relationships. Think about how you are communicating with your customers. If your customers haven't had a newsletter from you in the last month, then you need to get something out to them quick. They need to know what's going on within your business. They need to have confidence that you are going to keep on being a really reliable supplier for them, and indeed demonstrate ways in which you have adapted so that you can not only save your business, but potentially save theirs as well. And I think as far as a communication strategy right now, if you follow those principles, you'll be in a much better place than those that perhaps right now have gone, we can't afford to do any marketing, stop everything, and let's just cut as much as we can. Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you all very much for joining me. I'm going to wrap the webinar up there, and I hope to talk to you all again soon. Please stay safe. Thank you very much.